Hello. You are listening to the Carroll Connection with your host, Jared Carroll.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Carroll Connection. I'm your host, Jared Carroll, here to bring you guys another great episode. I did want to take a chance to shout out last week's episode 161 with Tucker Sullivan. He is an author, writer of the short poem book For Late, and he wrote that book through pretty much 2015 to 2020 through all the chaos that was happening through those years and overcoming a lot of his mental health issues that he was working through, and wrote a short poem book and was able to self-publish. And I thought it was really great. And we talked a lot about that and a lot of things in his life. And if you want to check out that episode, you can go to thecarrollconnection.simplecast.com. Also available Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the major listening platforms. If you want to go watch the podcast, go on YouTube, search The Carroll Connection or Jared M. Carroll, and it should pop up right for you. And if you want to be a guest or return as a guest, hit me up on Instagram at Jared M. Carroll or at The Carroll Connection, and we'll set that up. And I've been giving this kind of 2 cents like antidote. With the holidays, it's kind of busy, so I'm pretty much scheduled out for the rest of the year. So if anyone's returning, just reach out and I will try to make stuff work, and we'll align schedules to get you on the podcast. So that brings me to episode 162 with Daniel Mendes.
Hola.
Welcome to the podcast, my man.
It's good to be here. Thank you for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. We've been talking about this for a little bit, trying to get you, when you came back to Seekonk, to kind of sit down and record. So I was glad we were able to set some time apart and just kind of start recording this stuff. So I like to kind of start off the podcast asking you kind of just who you are and what you're doing currently, just something a little short.
Yeah, so I am a professional communicator. I work in New York City as a communications and investor relations professional. I work in the financial sector. Been doing that for the last 5 years, so that's sort of my professional gig at the moment. I shouldn't call it a gig. I'm very invested in my professional life, but I have a bunch of creative side projects and things that I'm hoping to bring to life in the next couple years. So that's probably why you invited me on, or where you caught wind of me.
Yeah, and I saw you started posting more on Instagram and stuff, and like this creative side was really starting to show through your stuff you were sharing, and I thought it was a great time to kind of invite you on the podcast, and we'll talk about some of these projects and stuff that you're aspiring to create and work through as we go through the podcast. As you've heard through the podcast, and for any new listeners, I like to start with family dynamic, and I always give my little like cliche, corny little reference of why I do it. I always reference like building a house, the foundation of the house, and I always reference that as like our upbringing, our family unit, kind of the basis of who we are as people stems from this, whether it's the good, bad, or ugly. It all stems from family unit. And I always like to talk about this because everyone has a different family dynamic. So I think it's important to kind of talk about these things, especially when we're talking about your life here. So whatever you're comfortable with sharing, I'll allow you to kind of take the floor and go into that.
All right, it's a loaded question. I would say like at 30,000 feet, I had a very fucked up but very loving childhood. You know, like I think that it's very odd. Like I've met people from the Seekonk sphere later in life, and I don't think that they realized in a lot of instances that I was like dealing with kind of a chaotic home life. Like, and I love both of my parents, truly. I love both of my parents to death, and I have good relationships with them. But it was challenging growing up. I mean, I don't even know where to start, right? So my dad's side of the family immigrated from Portugal. And so there was a very like do it yourself. We were poor, but it didn't feel that way, you know? Like we didn't have very much, but it was very like my childhood home was built pre-1900s, I think, and my grandfather and all of my uncles gut renovated it. Which is like kind of wild because only 2 of them are engineers. Like everything that they did, including like they did the electric, they did the plumbing. But they just taught themselves in a lot of instances. So they're very, very scrappy and resilient people. And then on my mom's side, it's like the polar opposite. So they were some of the founding families of Rhode Island, the Eastons. If you go search my mom's maiden name, and you go way, way back, you actually can find they were on the colonial charter for Rhode Island in the 1600s. So they were colonial governors. So people tell me, they hear that, they're like, oh my God, that's the American dream. Because like my dad literally is a, off the boat immigrant. Now on my mom's side, it's like those folks founded the state of Rhode Island. They were some of the first Quakers in America. They brought they helped bring Quakerism to Rhode Island, and that was their whole thing. They came with like Roger Williams. They were religious dissenters. I don't look a single fucking thing like my mom. So that was a big thing in childhood, was it's like two different worlds, right? Like you have these like Portuguese immigrants who, like, my grandparents lived with us too. Like initially we lived with them. We lived in Seekonk, by the way. I spent my whole early life in Seekonk. But it was odd because my grandparents, they kind of worked their way up. It was the very like typical Portuguese immigration story. My grandfather came when he was 26. He already had all of his kids. He had like 5 or 6 kids already in Portugal. So he comes, he works for 2 years, he earns enough money, he sends it back to Portugal. They come over, they're living in East Providence for a little while. They save up money, they move to Seekonk, and they have like 7 or 8 acres of land. That's where my dad grew up. So he was a Seekonk alum. All my aunts and uncles went to Seekonk. And then like they were funny too. Like they were a weird bunch. Like my uncle John was on the football team. He would like shoot dice with Jason Swepson on the back of the bus. I remember Frank Mooney was like his track coach. He was my track coach too. So when when Mr. Mooney met me, he was like, "What's your Uncle Johnny up to these days?" And I was like, "He's a principal." And he was like, "Johnny, you gotta be shitting me. I had to pull his ass out of the bus with Swepson. He works with kids though. Good for him." You know, it was just very like, so it felt like a very small world, and very loving. But yeah, I don't think I realized when I was a kid how poor we were. Like I grew up with my grandparents for the first 5 years. My mom's family, like I just didn't know them very well. So my grandfather on that side, he went to Brown and Harvard, and he passed when I was 2. But he was a doctor, and he had remarried later in life. My mom's family had all this money, like they were very wealthy. So my mom kind of like married down, so to speak. Like it was a bit of a controversy, I think, in her family when she met my dad, who was like, he didn't go to college, or he didn't finish college. Like he was just waiting tables or bussing tables. And you have two polar opposite ends of the American experience. Like my mom was living in Barrington on the water, and my dad was like, he was, you know, they were just like really living the immigrant life. They didn't change much. Like they lived how they did in Portugal. My grandparents would have like chickens and rabbits, and they would grow their own food. My grandfather would go fishing in the mornings, and they would cook the fish. Like it was old world stuff, man. That's how I grew up. So my mom's like, her whatever prestige and all the stuff attached to her, to me it's like I don't have their name. I don't look anything like my mother. I literally don't look like I am her son. So it was just fucking weird because I have a little sister who's blonde, blue eyes. We look nothing alike. Racially, it was like I felt like I was on an island. Like I felt very comfortable with my dad's side of the family because I like looked like them and they were very loving. And then a lot of the times I didn't feel comfortable with my mom's side of the family. And it was very like we didn't do a lot of organized activities. It was like totally unstructured. We didn't have the resources, I think, to be putting me in like camps and have like nannies and stuff. So it was just like my Portuguese grandparents and my mom kind of just like, you know, there's tons of pictures of me in the field, like working. I'd get up when I was a kid at 5 in the morning, 6 in the morning. Whenever the sun would come up, I'd get up and I'd meet my Portuguese grandfather out in the fields that he had. And I would just do chores. I would just work with them. And so I didn't feel poor because it was like I wasn't even in my little house. Like we lived at that time for the first 5 years of my life when I'm living with my grandparents in Seekonk, it was 4 people, my mom, my dad, my sister, and me, in like a 700 square foot 1 bedroom. So there was like a period of my life where I was like I was sharing a mattress on the ground with like my mom and my sister. You know, like we really did not have money. And I don't think people appreciated that because I didn't think it was that weird. But then eventually my dad bought a home, and it was like a total favor. Like that, what I mentioned, the gut renovation thing. Man, he was a paper boy in Seekonk, and his 80-plus-year-old neighbors that had lived next to my grandfather, wife dies, there's no next of kin, they got to get rid of the house, so they sell it to my parents for like 80K, which is like insane that a person could get a house for 80K. Like I see that in this area now. I'm just like, that would cost literally like 400 now. You know, so we were very lucky to kind of be able to even grow up in Seekonk. Like my parents had been living in East Providence prior to them like, you know, they basically had to convince my grandparents to like live with them, and I think they paid rent to my grandparents. Otherwise I would have grown up in East Providence, and I wonder how I would have turned out, you know? Like I do think the Seekonk school systems were safer, And I think we wouldn't have been any less poor in East Providence. And I just think that there's a little bit more, I don't know, there are more town resources in a place like Seekonk. So that's sort of the backdrop is it's like there's not a lot of money. There's like, I'm hearing Portuguese at home and it's very culturally mixed. Those are early days though. Like it gets, I don't know, that's probably just the first 5 to 10 years of my life. And then my grandfather eventually moved. And then shit really changed and got kind of, things got like, we were just poor in the early days, but it was very nice and loving. And we all like, there was always like family and some uncle and cousins or whatever. And then things got really hard when my grandfather passed. And that was I was in sixth grade at the time, so I'm the oldest in my family too. I was the very first person on my dad's side of the family born in America, and that like I don't think people appreciate like no one even has to tell you that we're expecting a lot from you. Like like when you are the first person to come along and you're born in the States, like there's a people are excited. They want to see what you're gonna do. And it was all positive, but then I think when my grandfather passed, it was like he was almost like the backup dad. You know what I mean? My dad was like I said, he didn't go to college, and I have a shit ton of respect for him because he didn't go to college, but like he built a career for himself as a creative director, just like he was an artist. Like he would just do drawings and paintings and stuff. But he got to a point where he had kids. He had been working at McDonald's. Like my mom didn't work after she had me, and he was just like I think they met when she was a waitress and he was bussing tables. He gets a job as like a manager at McDonald's, and she's like, "Dude, that's not like we got kids, bro. You got to get a better job than that." So she helped him start a graphic design career, and it took off, and he did really well for himself. But like when my grandfather passed, it was like that was the same time that my dad's career was starting to move. So we were just starting to see money for the first time, but at the same token, we were losing that support. And he just like, I love my dad. He didn't handle it that well. Like he could have done a lot better with it, but I appreciate how difficult it was for him at that time because on the other side of things, my mom who she has congenital health issues. So since I was born, she's been suffering from she has a disease called medullary sponge kidney. I think only about 1 in 5,000 people get it in general, but hers is one of the most severe cases medical doctors have ever seen. Like, oh my God, bro. Like, she's literally passed thousands of kidney stones in her life because her kidneys don't process effectively. And you can imagine if you're passing thousands and thousands of kidney stones, it absolutely destroys your entire system. It just slowly but surely destroys your body. So that got really, really severe when I was in middle school because she developed another condition. Had nothing to do with the kidney condition. It was a bladder condition called interstitial cystitis. And basically, the symptom profile of that, which is more common, is it feels like you have a UTI. So imagine you're passing thousands of kidney stones with a perpetual UTI. She just lived in excruciating pain. So by the time I got to high school, she couldn't leave the house anymore. She was fully, I don't know, man, like she doesn't like the word disabled, and I don't like that she doesn't like the word disabled. Like that's something that 'cause I have all these health issues that I've found out about late in life. Um, but yeah, man, she got really sick, and watching someone suffer, it's like people know like it's hard in theory because she would regularly be in the hospital. She's not in the hospital, like it's just sometimes your house gets to feel like a war zone. It wasn't a big house. We didn't have very much money, like I said. So it was like 1,200 square feet, and we're all like right on top of each other. And it's like sometimes the whole house just smells like throw up and pee, and like it's no one's fault. It is what it is. There are pill bottles everywhere. It's like you don't know where your parents are some of the time. Sometimes because mom's in the hospital. Sometimes dad's busy with work, or just I don't know. We also just didn't know where it was sometimes. So there were just it was very once that middle school portion came, it's like grandpa dies, I'm sad, but don't really get a chance to process that because I'm like, he was like a father to me. And then my dad kind of falls off the rails. His mental health not great with that, and then mom gets sick. So by the time I'm in high school, like by freshman year, my dad wasn't living with us. I didn't really talk to him that year. My mom was, regularly going to the hospital for things that were life threatening. And I'm just like a kid at Seekonk, like, just trying to figure it out. And I don't even think I knew how bad it was. Like, it was normal for me. I had grown up with a mother that was sick. So to me, it's just like the frequency is going up. Like, she's going to the hospital more, or she's feeling worse more. And she's very tough. Like, she would be suffering, but you also, like, I mean, she had pain meds and stuff, but like, you would never know it. You'd have friends come over the house. She puts on a brave face. She might like duck off into the back room and just like need to rest for a whole night. But like, she was very good at putting on an appearance of feeling like healthy. So I think that like I sort of suspected things were off. But by the time high school came around, it was just like, it's really fucked up and I'm kind of traumatized, but I'm also close enough to like getting out of the school system that I didn't really like. I think about this sometimes. Like, I think if I had raised my hand and told someone what was going on, I don't know if I'd have been able to grow up in that home. Like, I think I might have gotten pulled out. And I was reluctant to do that. Like, there were teachers at Seekonk that were really nice. And, like, I mean, people know when shit's fucked. You know what I mean? Like, when things are really fucked up like that, there are just certain things where it's like, they're like, how's everything at home? And you'll be like, oh, everything's fine. My mom just got out of the hospital. Like, everything's fine, but she was in the hospital. Okay. And then they start, they just see the mismatch between your answers and what you think is okay. And they're like, and they don't tend to like, it's not like they can just step in and be like, so we're going to put you in protective service. It's nothing like that, but it's like, I think the teachers see enough kids and they get enough experience to know like, okay, this kid, we should check on him and maybe give him a little bit of breathing room. Teachers at Seekonk were great, man. Like, there were a few that I think looked out for me in ways that I don't even, I didn't appreciate at the time how impactful it would be. I don't even think I necessarily appreciated how much advice that they were giving me that I didn't recognize as advice. Just like kind of seeing like, I just didn't always have parents. Like, in the most literal sense, I was just like, I knew they were there, but they were so encumbered by these other things. Like, I was just kind of alone. So having teachers and people in the community that I could lean on every now and again, like, I don't know, man. It took a village. I'm surprised that like I was able to get out of the situation that I did. I think that's why when I left, I never came back. But yeah, childhood was like, it taught me a lot. Like, I had to become a man very early. I think by the time I was 14, I was like, I felt like a man. I had to take care of things at the house. I had to help with my mom. And it wasn't direct help always. A lot of it was like emotional support and just like my dad. That was the thing my dad wasn't good at. He's an immigrant and he's just kind of old school. He's super good with her health stuff in terms of like, you need a bandage changed or something broke, technical stuff. But in terms of like the emotional, like the soft, like how do I deal with this psychologically and emotionally, not really his forte. So that's where I had to pull a lot of weight. And I think everyone has to pull weight in terms of like, no one's cooking food for us, bro. Like, we didn't, I can only think of a handful of times on a sort of regular week basis that I would ever sit down with my family and eat food. There's just so many things now as an adult that when I encounter that kids have, like sitting down as a family to eat. I don't know, going to like we didn't go on trips for the most part as a kid. Like, I didn't get on airplanes. Like, there were just so many things I see families do and I'm like, shit, man. And it makes me really happy when other people have that, but I get a little sad and I'm like, all right, so I missed out on some things.
Yeah, it sounds like you've been able to unpack a lot of this stuff though as you've been growing up too, and that's why I felt like it was important to allow you to have that like kind of time and space to like really talk about this because we were talking off podcasts about some of your creative endeavors that are kind of being inspired by a lot of the stuff that happened throughout your childhood. And a lot of this stuff molded you into the person you were and were able to kind of overcome these things to be the person you are now. And I think it's always important to acknowledge these things and hear these things because people that might tune in, like you said, wouldn't have known a lot of this stuff if they never even asked. Like they just see you like maybe on the track, just running and just like, oh, there's Dan just chilling. He's doing his thing. Like
Yeah.
it seems like he's in a good mood. He's happy. And as other kids, we don't always perceive those things at home too. Like especially for people that might be in a little bit more like privileged situation, like things were like relatively good. I would say at my house, I think where I suffered a lot of issues was we had like from like fourth grade all the way into like high school is like 7 deaths like in like 10 years or something like
Yeah.
that. Is like I mean when you have a big family, you also have to expect a lot of death as well, and dealing with that, I wasn't good at that. Like, I wasn't taught how to regulate emotions, kind of stuff that you're talking about with like traditional father figures. They're not really good at expressing that either. So you kind of look up to them to emulate that. And it's like, I should just sit with this and not really do anything with it and just be a man almost. And I shouldn't cry about this. I should be okay. And then you're in your bedroom alone at nights, like weeping because like you just lost like your grandparents. And it's like, how do you cope with this and how do you move on and then go to school the next day and just be like everything's fine when you just lost someone you cared for.
Yeah.
So a lot of us are all going through different traumas and stuff at home that necessarily don't show in the day to day in the classroom or on the athletic fields that our friends might not pick up on, and they're not always equipped either to recognize those things like the teachers are, like you mentioned. So I think it's a benefit of growing up in a pretty good school system within Seekonk and a pretty good town that seemed like that, at least growing up, that they cared about us when we were growing up and wanted us to do better and excel in academics and sports. So I think that was really great to touch on. And as we kind of transition with your life, um, how did like athletics play a role into that? Obviously, it was probably somewhat of a like escapism too from what you were experiencing at home. It sounds like.
Yeah, well, I think that one of the interesting things was like I didn't really do organized sports before high school, and I think that that was very difficult for me socially. Like I'm autistic and I have a very difficult time like I do well individually with people. Like I'm very perceptive, so I do pick up on one-on-one things, but like I don't really pick up on rules in a group. I really struggle with group rules, particularly where they're like informal little things. I don't notice that shit, and I put my foot in my mouth every fucking time. And kids are not forgiving. Kids need, like they really are looking for compliance. There's like the coolest kid, and they kind of dictate, and there'll be a little posse. You can't just break rank and file all the time. And I just kind of treat people equally. I think that's like a very autistic thing. People are people. And as a kid, I was it's not like confidence, but I think that I just kind of knew who I was. And I don't think every kid does. And when you're both like unconventional and you really know who you are, it's a threat to other kids. And so I didn't play sports. And I think that would have smoothed things over for me. You know what I mean? Because if you're talented athletically, there's a lot of things people will let you get away with. So when I got to high school, I was like very nervous because everyone else had sports where there were more team settings, and I didn't have that. But there was track, and it was like individual, and it felt like, okay, if the kids don't like me, because I got bullied a decent amount in middle school too. I didn't come into high school with a lot of friends. So with track, it felt like, okay, like even if I suck at this, it's not like I have to be like talking to someone on like the soccer pitch or something. I can kind of chill and do my solo thing. But it turned out I was good. I wasn't expecting to be good at track, but I was a good runner. And I don't really think I applied myself anywhere near as much as I should, but that team was a lifesaver for me. And a lot of the people I mentioned in the community who stepped up and were really good for me were people I met through track. Like the track families are amazing. Like I would like the Mullins and the Gregorics and all, like I love them so much, man. They were really, really good to me. And both the discipline and the structure of track was really helpful because it was like I'm living in the most chaotic home environment imaginable. So just having somewhere to go after school where there's like a defined thing and I'm doing it, and I think weekends there would be meet. So like it got me out of the house, which I think was good for me. The structure was good, and ultimately knowing what I know now about my health issues, I've been diagnosed with a lot of things later in life. Running probably has saved my life. I have a heart defect and I have a heart condition or a circulatory condition, and running is one of the frontline forms of physical therapy they recommend for it. And so I wonder, I started just performing better academically when I got to high school. It's not like I had been a bad student, but I was like kind of like above average, I would say, in middle school. And then high school, something like it seemed like track and school went hand in hand. I just got better at school. And I wonder if a lot of that had to do with like symptom relief of like brain fog and things. I have postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, POTS. It's pretty common, but it's not like people don't know. It's not recognizable. But yeah, they tell you should run for that. So the combination of like, I think running is something that kind of saved my life, both from a physical perspective, psychologically it was great. I just like need to get that energy out and get the anger out, man. When you're dealing with like a life situation that's just like fucked like that, there's just anger at the situation. You're not mad at anybody, but there's just this like raw energy, and running was a very, very good way of getting that out. And in such a healthy environment, like the kids were just really nice. Like man, I was very, very lucky. Yeah.
Yeah, having a place to go, especially with sports, especially when even from young all the way to high school, to have that outlet to connect with other people and to have a space that's usually motivating and inspiring, and it teaches you also life lessons that you don't always realize are actual life lessons in the moment too. Like sports, I remember one of the episodes that I've done with Ankit Cotwell, and he said sports are the ultimate uniter because everyone comes from different walks of life. But as soon as they step into the arena of sports, we're all together. And it doesn't matter if it's an individual sport like track when you're running really just with yourself, but you're part of a team though. And that goes with all sports typically is you're usually part of a team, even like the people who are playing tennis, they're part of a tennis team though. And that was the cool thing about like high school sports is like you kind of form cliques within those groups and you have friendships that go outside sports and you connect with those people outside of the classroom and outside the athletic fields and create lifelong friendships on top of that. And I've been able to have that with football and having those lifelong friendships really sets you up for long-term success, especially as you get into adult life and having those people to rely on and when things go wrong and to compare lives, especially obviously Thanksgiving just happened. A lot of people reunite around this time of year to do that stuff. And I think it's always great to have that within a town like this. And it's kind of like almost like a stereotypical town in that aspect. And I think it's really cool that we have that. But going further with your life, because I want to continue with this progression, getting towards like senior year now. This is
Yeah.
where things start to change for you. And where does your life take you? And what's the trajectory after high school?
So senior year of high school, like things were like still probably it was probably their most messed up at home because my mom was at her sickest. I actually think that she hit her physical lowest point probably in it started like the true decline to her lowest point started my senior year and ended midway through college for me. So it was a very difficult time and I think I just needed to shield myself. I found out after sophomore year of high school that I was ranked 4 in the class. And I wasn't really I didn't have ambitions initially of not wanting to be valedictorian or anything. But once I found out I was 4, I like worked a little harder. Then junior year happened and I got to number 2. And I remember Mr. Kennard telling me I was number 2 and I was like, "Well, fuck, I gotta try to be number 1." So senior year, I worked really, really hard and I eventually did become the valedictorian at Seekonk. It took honestly, I was just angry. I was really angry at my life situation and I used it as motivation. And I just didn't have a life that year. I don't think people appreciate like I went to Brown University. I knew I wanted to go to an Ivy League school by halfway through high school. Never would have been something I thought was possible for me when I got there. Like Miss Lawrence had us write on our flashcards freshman year when you started, what's your stretch goal for like 4 years? And I wrote as my stretch goal, go to Brown University, never thinking that was like a real thing for me. So when I found out after Mr. Kennard told me like you're 4th in the class, I was like, wait, I might be able to actually pull that off. So I just went for it. But I was probably working like 100-hour weeks. Wake up every day before school, 6 a.m. School till 2, track till 5, get home, shower, eat. By 6 o'clock, I'm doing homework until midnight, 1 o'clock. Wake up, do the same. That was every single day for me. Never missed it. Didn't go out during the week. Luckily, my friends were very good at school too. Like they mostly did sports, and so we all had the same schedule. And that was senior year though. I just grinded, and it was probably the most work intensive year I had because I also had to do the applications for the Ivy League, and like they're just more demanding. They have you write more essays. They look for more. They submit. You have to submit more material. You have to take additional tests. So it was just a lot of prep work, and I'm dealing with that while like my home life is like kind of messed up. So it was very busy, and I think I like kind of. I just remember getting out of school thinking like I need a break. Like I can't believe I got to be valedictorian and I accomplished all this. Like I did every club imagine. I actually think I won every major award that Seekonk has to offer. I don't think there were things that I didn't. You know what I mean? At the end, and I didn't plan to do that. It was truly just like a traumatized person who needed like an outlet, and I think that was it. But then I got out and I was like, I don't know who I am. I don't really want to go straight to college. I would love to take a break, and I didn't, and I regret it. I think it was stupid. But yeah, that was my senior year. And so I go to college thinking I'm just going to study economics and go into finance, which I ultimately did. But like, really should have taken time off. That was very dumb, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think it's cool to hear this point of view from someone who had on paper a lot of success in school and to hear that perspective of like even becoming valedictorian, going to Brown, that maybe I could have taken that year off and that would have been beneficial. And I took a semester off and I still was struggling to figure out what the fuck to do. And like, it's that angst of like, you finally overcome that mountain and then you're prepared for what's after it, but you're not though.
Yeah.
And a lot of us will walk through those valleys of college and people will party, will do different things and experience different people. And it's good and all, but a lot of people don't necessarily figure out what they truly love to do and who they truly are.
Yeah.
And that college experience is supposed to help with that. And I think it can create good networks and new relationships. And I think that's all great. But there's something with our college education system that's kind of broken. And we're seeing it now more than ever with a lot of like post COVID education where the school just doesn't seem as valuable as it once was, like portrayed to us. The college experiences doesn't seem as like aesthetically pleasing as it did in the past, and the degrees aren't really for a lot of people panning out in real life. And the job market is also really difficult right now, so you got to play that into the role. And people will tend to kind of fall into positions like if you asked me when I was younger if I was gonna do accounting finance, I would have been like, "What the fuck? No!" Like, what the
Yeah.
hell? But a lot of us will take jobs because you look at your parents and you look at people around you and you want to be financially stable. You want to provide a life for people. You want to earn money because life requires that. That's part of the currency to live, to buy food, to have housing. So that's part of the transaction. But what happens is we'll push aside our personal endeavors, like our passions, what we truly aspired to have. And I think what we're gonna get into with this conversation too is kind of going through that process of going to different places and experiencing different things. Because you were talking to me off podcast about how going through college and then being able to move to Miami to move to New York. A lot of these things are very life changing. So, kind of talk me through kind of your college experience and into those decisions to move away and what that was kind of like for you.
Yeah. Well, to be honest with you, I actually never wanted to move. Like my dad had grown up in the same house he grew up in. I grew up in that house for a bit until they bought theirs, like I said, but my plan was just to take that over. You know, my dad gets older, he retires, I find a job around here. Man, I had my high school sweetheart. I had a crush on her since like second grade. We both liked each other on off. She's a Portuguese girl. Like I just would have loved, like I would have been very content just to re-up on kind of what was there, but the home life had gotten bad to the extent that like I couldn't stay. Like I lived at school. I mean, I didn't live at school. I lived at home during school for the first 3 years, and I think somewhat it was a bit financial. Like I didn't graduate with any debt. It's all need based at Brown, so they gave me close to a full ride just based on need. I was a Pell Grant student. I think I got the max Pell Grant my first year. Um, and so I knew at the outset I needed to be at like an Ivy League school because they gave more money. Like what's crazy is my sister went to UMass and like they did not give her anywhere close to the same package that Brown gave me, which is wild that a state school would be more like it's like kind of shame on the state. Like it's gotten just obscenely expensive. And I didn't take the break and I forced myself to do it and it was stupid. So I didn't get the max benefit out of it, right? Like I was part of it was the not living there, and I think that really it was. I don't know if the money savings were worth it, to be honest with you. I don't think I would have done well with the kids because like I felt poor at Seekonk. Brown is like a different level of rich. You know what I mean? Like a lot of these kids just have trust funds. Like they don't like they like for them this is just a foregone conclusion that they're there and they're just like why are you all fussed, you know? So I had a hard time socially at Brown. I didn't really I was a bit of an outlier socioeconomically, and I wasn't on a team. You know, I didn't do sports in college. I was an applied math econ major, and like, you know, it's applied math. Those kids are not exactly like they're pretty studious and straight laced. So there weren't a lot of avenues outside of just trying to go to parties and stuff for me to meet people. And I'm not a partier. I didn't drink in high school. I don't drink now. I didn't drink in college. I'll have a drink, but like not a party person. So it was very much like very solo. I feel like college was almost this like I went out into like the wilderness and obviously I'm at Brown, but I'm living at home just kind of solo. I joke that I spent more time with my friends that went to community college and stuck around here. Like I would go to Brown like I was going to a community college. I'd come back and I'd just hit up my buddies and we'd go to like downtown Providence. And I didn't think of myself as like, oh, I'm this Brown student. It was just like, that's where I go to college and get my education. And I think that unfortunately, to get the max benefit out of a place like Brown, you kind of have to go in like, oh, I go to Brown, and you have to milk it a little bit, and in a way that I'm just like, you people are fine, like you're smart, yeah, but like there are a lot of other things you don't have going for you. So I don't think I was enamored by Brown. I don't think I felt like welcome there. Academically, I thought it was an interesting program. I don't know if people realize this. Brown has zero undergraduate requirements. You can take whatever you want. You just have to do a major. They don't have real grades. It's A, B, or C. There are no pluses or minuses. There's no GPA, and you cannot fail. If you fail, it doesn't show up in your transcript. You just don't get credit, and you can retake it. They actually have you. There's a shopping period at the start of every semester, and you can add and drop courses at your whim for a month. You can go all the way into October, basically, not even having a set schedule. You're just like shopping around, figuring out what you want to take. So it's like I'm ADHD and either I wasn't medicated or and certainly not diagnosed at that time. So I was struggling psychologically. That was the big thing for me in college. It's like I'm stuck in this house that's toxic. I don't really like the kids at my college. I don't feel like I have much in common with them. I did make some friends. Like I'm very grateful for the college friends I did make because they are, I still am friends with them to this day. My best friends are mostly from Brown. I have some from Seekonk. Um, but yeah, man, I got very depressed. It was probably the lowest. It ushered in a wave of depression for me that became very difficult to shake. And I think some of it was the home environment, but some of it was just getting discouraged because I knew something was off, like psychologically, and I didn't know it was ADHD. Not that ADHD is specifically a psychiatric condition; it's neuropsych. So there's some nuance there, but like when you are struggling to do things that you know you're smart enough to do, but you just can't bring yourself to do them and you can't get organized, it's like Seekonk is, if nothing else, very structured. Brown had no structure, and I didn't like the other people. So it was just like I'm isolated, and I don't feel like I'm having success in what I'm applying myself in. So that's a recipe for not really feeling great about yourself. So I graduated by the skin of my teeth. I mean, I did well in the courses I took, but I took the minimum number of classes. It was like really, I actually had to apply because my mom got so sick during my sophomore year that she went into sepsis. She came very close to dying. Basically, when I got to college, it started a period of like once a year, every year for the last decade, my mom has had a near death experience. And it's some of them have like truly like I'm waiting around by my phone for a few hours, like, is she alive or dead? I don't fucking know. And college was really what started that, like sophomore year. And I think the stakes felt very high because at any given time I was worried that I would have to drop out and help support the family. That was like a real, like there was a time my dad didn't have employment and it was like the company had been acquired. It wasn't like he got fired, it was just he was laid off. But shit, my mom couldn't work and I'm like the only person in the house at that time. It was my first internship sophomore year and I was working at TD Bank as a risk analytics intern. I was the only person in that house that was earning like a stable like salary type income. So I loaned that money to my dad for him to pay for my sister's first semester of her college. So I'm dealing with that while I'm in school. So I'm just like, bro, I felt like this is just like too much. It's just a lot of responsibility and like it's nothing I asked for. And I got out just like, and I took the break finally. I just didn't do shit for 6 months. I actually walked away from the job I was supposed to do. I was gonna be a teacher. I was gonna do Teach for America, but I just didn't have my shit together enough to say like, I didn't feel confident that I wouldn't get cold feet. And I didn't want to subject like 200 kids that I'm teaching to me deciding I want to change my career path like a year. You know what I mean? It felt wrong. So I punted on that, stuck around here. I worked on a local political campaign. And from there, I had two job options. One would have taken me to Miami, the other to New York. The one in Miami was very fun, and I can talk about that a little bit in a sort of segue. But yeah, college, it felt like just something I had to get through, and it was a really dark time in my life. And I've climbed out of the dark time. My mental health is really good, and it's been good for the last 2-3 years. But I feel like I shouldn't apologize so much. I feel I must have been a tough person to really form a deep connection with when I was that depressed. But knowing what I was dealing with on the other side, I'm like, I'm surprised it didn't get worse, that I was still able to have a job and get through school. I didn't drop the ball, but yeah, what a challenging 4 years, Jesus.
This type of conversation is kind of the basis of why I started this, was getting back to asking people what they went through and why they do what they do, basically. And I would know none of this if I just didn't invite you over to do a podcast with you.
Yeah.
And to do this in a setting like this is, I assume, your first time with the podcast equipment and
Yeah,
cameras and stuff.
I haven't done I was on TV once in high school. I was on a game show.
Oh, okay. So like you have a little bit of experience in that aspect on being
It's
on
like
my
a
screen.
way different. Those you're like melting under the lights. Yeah. You
Yeah.
got like makeup and you're afraid to. It's a little different.
Well, and this is our real first time sitting down and having a conversation with one another. Like, I knew of you, but I didn't know you.
Yeah.
And to kind of break down that wall and have the conversation is something that I don't take for granted for having this podcast. It's something I actually hold like a lot of responsibility for, is carrying on this like legacy, not only of you, but every guest that's ever come on here with their life story, to continue with that and to hear you talk about these things so people can understand a little bit of how your brain works and how you work as a person and what you went through. Like, yeah, you might have been a difficult person given the circumstances, but how many people even asked? Like, most people wouldn't have asked or probably didn't ask. And it takes that initial, like, how are you, to kick off something, but it also is incumbent on the person to actually say how they're doing too. So it's a two-way street that a lot of us will not walk. And it's trying to kind of, with this podcast, ignite those conversations with people in our lives. So hopefully someone listens to this and wants to check up on you and like see like how you're doing and what you're up to, and maybe ignites another conversation with someone else, and that snowballs. But I think it's important to have these conversations and to hear these perspectives because they're really valuable in terms of like the college experience. Like, I think it's cool to hear your point of view going to an Ivy League school, being a valedictorian who had a lot of academic success, to say like, yeah, that wasn't all that. And I think it's important for people to hear that because they see the big names of the school, they think it's all that, and for to have a kind of like a firsthand experience, and obviously your experience is going to be different from everyone else's given your life circumstances, but still it's a valuable experience to talk about because the prestige of those schools kind of carries the weight. So with that, talking about those Miami and New York experiences, kind of talk to me about how you ultimately made the decision to go try Miami for a little bit, and then also how you ended up in New York.
Yeah, so Miami was funny because after I graduated Seekonk, I put together with a few friends, I organized like a racial justice walk in Seekonk, and we drew pretty good numbers. We put it together in about 72 hours. We drew somewhere between 70 and 100 folks, which is a really good turnout in that time and for a town this big. I mean, Providence had done a demonstration a couple days, maybe the week before, and they drew 200. And that's Providence, it's a population of over 200,000. So Seaconk's like maybe 14,000. So we did great in terms of turnout. And it was just, wasn't expecting there to be media coverage, but there was. And people just saw me in the news. So actually a family friend who knew my second cousin of mine saw that and was like, oh, that's really cool that he did that. And he was like, he was inspired by it. And he just was like, what's he doing for work? And that's how I found out about the Miami job. The other one I found through school. And so I was interviewing at both concurrently in the fall 2016, got offers from both at the same time. And the New York place was offering me more money. Like they were offering me a pretty good, like, I think their all-in comp package coming out of school would have been like it would have been six figures straight away. But during one of the final interviews at that place, like I've gotten this question so often as a professional. I think it's one of the most offensive things you could ask a human being. Do you work hard? And it's just so racial in my, like, first off, in what world do you need to ask someone that question? Second off, what do you think they're going to say? No. Like, you're really asking them to justify whatever.
That's how I feel about when someone, we had a survey at work, is like, can you be your authentic self? I'm like, really? Like,
Yeah.
no, obviously I can't
Right.
say I fucking don't want to do this. Like, I'd be like, yeah, sure, I'll do it for you. You're like, you have to,
Yeah,
you have to put
exactly.
on a show a little bit for work. You have to, your work self and your real self. You can never be your authentic self at work. It's just not
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah, so I was just like offended in general by a few of their questions. That one really got me because I responded and I told them, like, I was kind of like, excuse me, like, I watched my family immigrate here like old school, like brick by brick, just saving everything. Like, Hard work is just like literally my genes. And then the guy's just like, "Oh, are you Mexican?" He started guessing my ethnicity. I'm like, Jesus Christ, I can't work at this company. Like, absolutely not. These people are insane. So I punted on that, and then I took a job at like the other place was funny, man. It was the most ghetto fabulous recruiting pitch ever, and it just like totally worked on me. They really knew me. They picked me up at the airport. Like they had one of the co-founders pick me up in his like Audi. They put me on like the Shore Club, this like resort in Miami. It was like a very like like ritzy kind of like we're trying to make a show. They weren't offering anywhere near as much money, which was funny. But it was also a cheaper market, and I just like after going down to Miami and just I felt more at home there in terms of like demographics. Like the Portuguese are weird. They're around here and nowhere else, and my last name is Mendes, so people don't know what to do with me, but they assume I'm Latino, and so I just felt more at home. Like in New York, there's just like I'll get the question like all the time, like where are you from, this, that, the other. No one cared in Miami. It was just I looked like I belonged there. So it was really fun, but I worked for a sports nutrition company doing digital marketing. So it was my first foray into media. Like I would put together, it was like both technical and also not. Like I would do data analytics and sort of support e-commerce and like the analytics behind social media, but I would also create content. I managed like 100,000 follower account, and I would set up photo shoots. I would work directly with our athletes. I mean, I got to meet some pro athletes, which was fun. I don't know if we shot with them, but I would just sort of I'd get free product. I'd go to gyms. I would like be recording stuff, shooting stuff. So that was where I first learned how to work like a camera. But it was funny. I had studied applied math and economics undergrad. The other job I punted on would have been like consulting, like very straight laced. This to me was like it had nothing to do with my undergrad major, but I was still using the same skills. So I was like, fuck it, that seems better to me. I can be more expansive. Um, but ultimately, Miami was not like it's not a great place to start a career, depending on what you want to do. It was really fun. I would do it again in a heartbeat. But eventually, I moved to New York, and that's where I've been for the last 5.5 years now. And very different work, very different environment. It was not like a sports nutrition company where I'm working with like a bunch of bros. Because I worked with all of like former college athletes. It was so fun. And it was very diverse. Like every person I worked with was either Hispanic or black, and it was just very like I just felt very at home, and it was very youthful. Miami was great, and then I moved to New York with a now ex girlfriend, and I still love her to death. She's great. She's like family to me. But grew apart. That's I don't need to get too much in the weeds there, but like I moved with her in 2018 because she got into a PhD program at Columbia. So I financed the move. I had packed my stuff in a car to go to Miami, by the way. That's part of the story I don't highlight enough, but like I had no money. Like I didn't have any money to start with. So I just took like loose shit for my house, went to Florida with like almost $0, just stuff in a car, just drove and just started life there, didn't come back. And it was a little Honda Civic. The Honda Civic died in Florida, sadly. I don't still have the Civic, but yeah, man, I did that for a year and a half and then financed the move to New York, found a job working in the financial sector. Like I said, I do communications and investor relations. Started off in a more traditional marketing function and then moved, I was doing the finance work for the last couple years, and then I've transitioned back to communications, which feels like it'll probably be a home for me. Like financial comms is probably where I'll at least if I don't like go down a creative path, like that's where I would spend time. But I would like to do other things besides just put on the suit every day.
Yeah, and we'll get into that pretty shortly, but just quickly touch upon the value of moving away from your hometown. Like, how was
Yeah.
that for you, positive and negative?
Um, I think that for me it was like kind of essential. I just think that it's different depending on where you're from, right? Like you get people from New York that just kind of never leave, but it's almost like you're getting enough exposure to things that maybe it doesn't matter. But if you're living around here, I think New England's very specific. I feel like I've gotten really accustomed with people from different parts of the US. I struggle to a degree with New England people. Like when I've been back here for a while, I'm like, I'm from here, like I get it. But they're a little rougher around the edges, they're not as easygoing. They're a little bit more like it's just a very specific personality type. So I think just getting to interact with different types of people, getting to like I've been surprised with like, oh, I really like people. I actually like the South gets a lot of hate, but like I don't know, just like the people feel a little slow, like the people feel a little more relaxed. So sometimes you meet people from other parts of the country and you're just like just it's simple little things, just realizing like I don't have to like live my life quite exactly the way that I do. So there's that. I think when you live in an international city, you just get exposure to a lot of cultures. That's the other thing. Like truly, like it's not just U.S. It's like really international. And I think when you start seeing how lots of different other parts of the world function, you realize how much of what we do is both subjective and scripted. Like I don't like being around here because of the number of conversations that I have that feel like they know what I'm going to say. They don't really, they're asking me how I'm doing. They don't care that much about what I have to say. They are expecting a certain answer. And if I give them something that's a little bit more unique, they're going to tune it out anyway because they're creatures of habit. They live there. I just find that I make fewer assumptions about other people. I make almost no assumptions about other people. And I've gotten a lot better at asking people questions. Like, I think living out of this area has made me better able to connect with people generally because I have enough life experience, enough experience with different walks of life and different people to just never make assumptions about like why someone is doing something or thinking a certain way. Like, it's just, there's an open mindedness that comes with living away that I think is essential. And I also think that it humbles the context. Like, I think when I come back here now, like I went to the Dublin Rose the other night. Like I did the whole like high school like, oh, I want to see how everybody's doing. And for me it's just fun. Like when I think back to Seekonk and I see a Seekonk person, I'm like so grateful. Like even if I didn't get along with them then, it's like there are some actual haters out in the world. Like there are people who will actually like fuck your day up and they're not good people. There aren't that many of those in this area. Like the majority of people we grew up with were like really good-hearted folks that just want you to be successful. And I think when you get the distance out and you can kind of like it's frustrating when you come back and you see the kind of small-mindedness sometimes of people stuck in their ways, but at the same token you understand why it exists of just like because they're going to be loyal as fuck and they're going to show up for the people they need to, and it's just that's just their world and how they know it. But getting that extra context allows you to it's almost like you can see what's really happening versus just the narrative people use to characterize what's happening. And I think when you're stuck in a local thing, an area, the narrative dominates. And it's like, I think people can get stuck. Like, I don't know if you felt like, I felt like in Seekonk, like I had an identity, this like character. And it didn't matter what I did. Once the character was set, people weren't going to update that. I would need to go and come back, and I would need to be different enough for them to perceive me that way. So it can kind of stunt growth in the sense that I think you can play to a character the people around you are expecting. And the context that you get from outside conditions you to be better about asking other people questions. And then I think you get better as well at self-defining and not accepting other people being like, you're this or you're that. You can actually be like, no, I'm not. And if that's how you feel about me, I'm setting a boundary here and I'm going to take an action to make sure that like, because that's damaging to my sense of self and my mental health. If you're taking something that is important to me or that I define as part of my identity and not taking it into account, you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. I think I definitely had that same experience of like, this is the character I'm playing in here. And I could imagine a lot of people felt that character shift when I came back because people were trying to put me back in that bubble. And I'm like, this is not who I am anymore. Like, I experienced things on my own that you guys didn't experience. And then it got like doubled down when I left. I had like a party going away because I graduated school and I was going away again. And people were like, "Oh, come out and see you. Come out and see." No one ever came out, and it's like one. It's kind of sad because it's like you could have had a place in Fort Worth, Texas, where you could have come out and chilled. We were right near Dallas. Like there's tons of stuff to do. The scene there was great. The food was great, and no one came. And it kind of like I had like constant FaceTimes with people, and I had my few people that I would reach out to, but
Mm.
most people didn't reach out and most people didn't come like they said they would. And it was kind of that reinforcement of like, all right, like this is really about me. Like I got to do something and be different and like I got to grow. And part of removing myself was forcing myself to grow. Cause otherwise I don't think I would have ever like made such a major life move to leave. But I was given the opportunity and I just thought, man, I think I need this.
Yeah.
And putting myself in the different environment with different friends, it allowed me to kind of look at things differently. Like you're saying, it created a new perspective to go down to the South and be in Texas and have so much diverse culture and great food and great energy. And then go to like Augusta, Georgia, where that was a little too South for me. Like that was the South. And I
Yeah.
was like, this is not really for me. when you're driving to your apartment complex, you see Confederate flags flying. I'm like, yeah, like you see that in your hometown, but like they mean this here. Like,
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm not fucking with this. And then to kind of come back and last several years, I've gotten better at like being able to recreate myself in my current environment.
Mm.
And I think people are accustomed to me being this way now, where it's not like a culture shock when I came back and started the podcast. It's
Yeah.
like what the fuck is this guy doing? It's like, no, this is what I do now. And it's upon you to like create that like narrative for yourself that you're constantly growing and constantly changing, which is important. I do want to get to talk a little bit about your creative side and how you've been diving into this lately, especially with the social media stuff. Like,
Yeah.
what was the initial push to start posting stuff and kind of putting yourself out there? Because I know that was a difficult thing for me to overcome.
Yeah. No, it's hard. I mean, to be honest with you, I don't like social media and I don't watch much of it. I actually didn't watch like any social media before I started making content. Like I truly was almost like agnostic to it. There was a period in like the last few years where my average screen time was like under an hour. So I just didn't do it at all. And then I just had sort of I had a long-term relationship end like I mentioned. There's just an element of like needing to rebuild a social life. You lose certain like couple friends. Like man, I think the experience of being because I was in a relationship for 6 years in my 20s, and I don't think people appreciate like I wasn't married, but like we kind of functioned like a married couple. Like I was financially responsible for a lot. And I needed that person. Like my home life was bad enough that like I don't know what I would have done without her. Like I don't know how I would have gotten established in life. There were a lot of skills that she taught me and things that like normally people learn from parents, but I didn't learn them from my parents. So I think initially I just started posting more just like in general, just like almost like firing up my account again, like, oh, I'm like a single person. I should just post just like life update stuff. But then after a year of just kind of being like, because I've been out of that relationship for a couple of years now, and the first year it was just kind of like, rediscovering self. But then once I did, what I remembered was just like in childhood, we always sang. We were just always encouraged to do music, and I had this like awful experience in second grade where I did like a talent show and I choked and I like got up and I was gonna just do in sync and I ended up like I couldn't sing it, man. I like did spoken word in sync because I was so nervous because of the crowd. And my sister was very artistic and I wasn't as it's not that I wasn't as artistic. We have very different brains and they're good at different things. When I close my eyes, I don't see pictures. It's a phenomenon called aphantasia, and there are different levels of it. But basically, people have different richness of visual perception when they close their eyes. Like how much visual detail do you hold on to? I hold on to almost none. Almost everything that goes on in my brain is auditory and verbal. And I do shapes and stuff to a degree, but like I couldn't draw. She could just draw beautifully. My dad's an artist, right? So he was like, always drawing or making something when he wasn't at work, and she would just do that with him. I could not do it. I could only do geometric stuff because it was easy. And I took that to mean I wasn't good at art and I just didn't pursue it at all. But I loved music and I loved doing impressions and things with my voice, acting, making skits. Just didn't pursue it. Got to high school. I auditioned for the school play kind of sneakily. I got a really good part junior year. I was going to be the supporting lead in Fiddler on the Roof. And then I asked Coach Mooney, I was like, hey man, can I do this? Like, I'll just be late to practice a few days. He was like, you can do it, but you can't also do practice. And I was like, oh, well, fuck you. Like, it is what it is. I did track. I was the Troy Bolton of the track team. But never gave myself permission to do it. And I think because life got so hard so early, like I think 14 years old, I started thinking about my life like most adults do. I just kind of shut off any creative ambition that I would have had and just said, no, I need to go make money. And that's sort of what I focused on. I was like a provider. But I never let go of the creative stuff. And in particular, I never let go of music. And I just realized in the last year, I get a lot of attention. So setting that other stuff aside, like, I don't know how best to talk about it because people think, like, you just sound like an egotistical asshole. But, like, I get a lot of attention in New York City. Like, in a city where you're supposed to be kind of anonymous and just, like, go out of your home, I get approached by people every single day. Sometimes because they want to know what ethnicity I am and they, like, make very painful, like, what are you? And they'll ask me. But mostly it's, like, men and women flirting with me. They're stopping me dead cold in the street trying to either get my number or my attention. And it's like, honestly, it's distracting at work. Like, I get so much attention from, especially like maybe not like my women. I love my women colleagues, but like in general, I get so much attention. It feels stupid not to try to put myself out there. And so what I would love to do is become an entertainer. I don't want to limit myself. I don't want to just say like, oh, I'm going to just make music or oh, I'm just going to pursue a career in acting. But I think I'm very good at entertaining people. And I've had a lot of public speaking experience. Like I've been getting on stages in front of thousands of people for a long time. Sometimes formally, sometimes informally. Like I did speech competitions in high school. I did the valedictorian speech. There's just been a lot. Like I've been on TV, I've been on the news, like and you add it up, it's kind of like between that and social media slash influencer experience early in my career, it's like I sort of have the skills to know how that world works. I just never thought of myself as the talent. So I kind of want to give myself a chance. Like I don't think the kid in me that wanted to be an entertainer ever got its shot. Like I just don't think I ever did that. And I was so dutiful to my family and loved ones. Like I think I owe it to myself to try to just start putting myself out there. And so I've started to make like fashion and style videos, frankly, because they're easy. It's a really easy form of content to make. And I just like fashion and style. It's not what I expect to do forever. It's just like one of probably five or six different things that I'm going to start doing very aggressively and simultaneously to launch a career in music and acting, because that's ultimately what I want to do. I've been really putting the time in with guitar. Like I played guitar at a very early age and I'm good at it, but I don't it's not my favorite thing to do. So for me it's like a multi-pronged business plan. Like I'm effectively going to just start treating myself as a business and I think most artists they are so invested in the creative and they get brilliant at the creative to the extent that they think that the creative is going to be the lever they need to move to make money off of it. I've worked in business and particularly with investors long enough, like for because I've literally sat on, $100 million transactions before. So I think I have a very strong sense of like business and corporate incentives. And I think in particular, I have friends from college who are doing entertainment, but often like in the industry and just kind of hearing how it works. I think like the business chops are what hold people back. Usually, it's almost like there are people who aren't that talented that if you just put an engine around them, a business engine, they could be famous. Like they could go make and do stuff. Like a lot of the most famous musicians out there, their brilliance is not in the music per se, but it's in the whole package of them. Their music isn't great, separated from the context of who they are as people. So I think in this first stage of what I'm doing is just I want to put myself out there to sort of self-define. And I don't want to look at what other people are doing on social media. I don't want to replicate any of it. I'm just being myself. And if it works, I think that means there's something there that I've tapped into a vein that exists in the world that sort of needs that particular thing. I think I don't assume I'm going to have that kind of success. So I'm really spreading my chips in why like a lot of different directions. So I'll do style and fashion because it's easy and I know it'll work. Like I've had enough early success on TikTok that I'm like, yeah, I could make that grow. I don't know if I could make money off of it, but I could make it grow. Then I have like just acting and skits and stuff. I don't want to do that yet because I have a full-time job and I don't want to put my foot in my mouth. But that's like would be really fun and that could like get me into the acting route. But I really want to start working on an EP. I've been starting to songwrite with the guitar stuff, and yeah, there's a documentary that I'm gonna work on. I posted once on Instagram that I started writing a novel when I moved to New York. I wrote about 30 to 40,000 words of that novel in under a year. And typically a first novel is 80 to 120,000 words, but the author might write like double that and pare it back. So I don't know how much towards a finished novel I wrote, but I invested a hell of a lot of time in it, enough to feel like the source material, even if it's not like a publishable novel, that it was so introspective and so focused on some of what I've gone through as a kid that I think that I can pull that into a different format. And what I'd really like to do as well is sort of test the current modes of distribution of different forms of media because I think there's a tremendous opportunity to I think that we are living in an age where people have not begun to appreciate that social media is no longer a digital scrapbook for you to just talk about your life. It is a business engine and it is an entertainment platform. And if you're not using it to create entertainment content, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's kind of silly in my opinion. Like as a non-user of social media, like coming out of my cave and like going back to it and seeing it, I'm like, this is an entertainment platform. You might not like the entertainment content I produce, but that's why this exists. And the way I'm positioned in a city like New York, where like you know when you get a certain level of attention, like you got a chance. You could do the Hollywood thing, or you could, you know what I mean? Like you could do show business, but then there are lots of people who are in that bucket. So you get to make the choice. Do you want to compete in that world? And I think I do. So I'm just getting started. So it feels almost weird to talk about because it's all perspective, but I'm open to any possible outcome. I'm open to the idea that I might be really bad at a lot of this stuff. Like I might suck, but I don't think I do. I think I actually might be good at some of it. And even if one thing of the six works, amazing. Awesome. That's enough for me. So, and I don't need to even do it for like professional audiences or like stadiums. Just getting to make art, I think, will heal my inner child. And I think healing some of that stuff will lend tremendously on the business side. Like if I just do stick with a professional 9 to 5, dealing with your shit emotionally still makes you a more effective human in every other context. So the art, even if it has no commercial value, will still be very good for me. My only condition for all of this is social media is very bad for your mental health, depending on how you use it. It's almost like the number of boundaries you need for yourself to do it in a healthy way is really significant. That's the real challenge for me. It's just like it's not the doing it or even knowing how it works. It's like not wanting to break certain rules that like I can do this once and it won't impact my mental health. But if I do it the once, I'm going to do it again and probably again. And once I've done it 10 times, it will be disrupting my mental health at that point. So knowing where those guardrails need to be is probably what I'm most concerned with. I'm also very concerned with virality. I've had a few things early that have just clearly gotten picked up by the algorithm. Like there just would be an hour or two I post something and I'm like likes and shit's coming in. I'm like I do not know these people. Like this got picked up somewhere. But to the extent that I've just heard horror stories of like people have videos that will go viral. They didn't mean for them to go viral, but they do. And then they're stuck with those followers. And then that becomes your commercial audience. Like it's a weird problem to have, but you can snatch defeat from the jaws of victory if you're not smart in the planning. So I think that's a lot of what I'm doing now is figuring out sort of using TikTok to test different brand things for myself of like how to position myself and then going to Instagram and seeing like how that intersects with their algorithm. But it's all very like I don't think I think about this in the way most creators do. I'm very logical. I'm autistic and I'm very like rigid and kind of in that way. So I'm taking that thinking, but allowing myself to do it in a creative way.
Yeah, I think you're going to have a lot of success with this. And I even told you a little bit about my TikTok aspect where I didn't, I would saw a lot of that emotional stuff on TikTok back in 2020. It was like, fuck. First one was like more like nicer, I guess. It was like hoping to see the person with the COVID stuff and type thing, and then that went viral. And then like I didn't mean for it to, and then it started to snowball and affect my content to the point where now, like I told you, like I don't really want to post on it because
Yeah.
that audience is that audience, and it's gonna take a big pivot to change that. And I mean, I will do it eventually. I'm not like stupid. I know it's like a platform that I need to use. But I think even with the content that you're making, I think the fashion stuff will go viral on TikTok easy. You're aesthetically pleasing looking person. Like you're gonna attract a lot of people just off that alone. And you like fashion, you dress nicely. Like that, there's an audience for that that's going to be attracted to that. Using the sounds, the hashtags, and all the right stuff will help boost that. As someone who's done it and used TikTok, that'll definitely help. But I think even just, I mean, you caught my attention with posting stuff, and that's how we end up having more of the conversation and
Yeah.
setting up the podcast was you taking that step and doing that. So I think you'll have a lot of success in doing that. We are getting towards the end of the podcast, so I'm going to start wrapping up with these things. So I do have that last question for you that I want to give you. So, what would your advice be for someone who wants to pursue their passion?
Um so I think that you know the whole like you don't care what other people think or you're not supposed to care what other people think. People throw that advice around very willy-nilly. I actually think what other people think matters quite a bit because we live in a society with other people. The question is, what people do you care about caring about your opinion, right? Like, who are the people who you trust enough when the shit gets hard and you're doing something creative that are your north star for who you are as a person that you won't lose sight, like when you have the TikTok that goes viral and you have this audience that's feeding a part of your ego, but it is just a part of your ego. Who are the people that are going to know you well enough holistically that they can walk you back down to earth? They won't be able to make you successful, These people are probably going to be five very close friends or family members. They won't make you successful. They won't be able to get you to the next level, but they're your security blanket. They're the people who will keep you sane. You need those people, very secure, stable people around you who you can lean on. It mostly psychologically, honestly. I think that's the hardest part with any venture or endeavor is just the like that self-doubt you have in the back of your head. Like, does this make sense? And I think most people, the best advice I've ever heard is like, if you just show up long enough, typically you're successful. I think that that really is true. If you have to have the passion too. You can't show up in a half-ass way. You have to really show up if you're going to show up. But like, in my opinion, the hardest thing always is just having a stable enough sense of self that you don't bleed into other people. You don't let their opinions overtake yours. So you just, I think almost as a rule, like I would give someone the practical advice of like, find five people, ideally people you've known for longer than 5 or so years, like people you've really have history with who know you well enough that you have to make it part of your business plan as the individual creator or entrepreneur, proprietor, whatever, to check in with those people. I actually think that that is the most important part of being a human and business person is having people that like you don't treat the relationship as like it just is a thing that exists. You should treat every relationship in your life the way you treat your romantic relationships with intentional effort, a plan, and that necessarily means you're not going to have capacity for everyone. But when you've decided for yourself what those 5 or so relationships are going to be that you really nourish in an intentional way and you put work in, like when I journal, it's very pragmatic. And I'll literally have sections on like, this is how I'm feeling, but what about the people in my life? How are my relationships to them? Because that informs how I'm feeling. It might not be direct. Some of those people might not even be referenced in the paragraph of how I'm feeling, but I need to do the work of checking in on these people. I think I've had the experience in life of people not checking in on me and feeling very alone and just like the world is resting on my shoulders. So I think having people that can remind you that's not the case sometimes requires you to take that intentional step of finding them. But I think that's the advice I would give. Find those people, invest as much as you can in them, and when be honest with yourself about what reciprocity looks like in those situations. I think a lot of people don't realize how selfish they are and like really hold yourself to the standard of giving as much to your friends as they give you, and I think really great things start to happen. So that would be my biggest piece of advice.
I think that's really great advice, and I think that's advice that holds true through time too. Is it's the people around you that help make you like, and you can't push that aside. We're social creatures in a social world. You have to acknowledge that, and I think that's really great advice. But Dan, I really appreciate you coming on this podcast.
Thanks,
It's been a great podcast. We've talked about a lot here, and talked about a lot of intimate stuff in your life, and I always appreciate anyone that will sit across from me and talk about these things. So thank you again for doing that.
Yeah, thank you for having me, man. I think it's very inspirational that you do this, and I'm glad someone from my hometown is taking on the. You've inspired me quite a bit because I think takes a lot of guts to do this stuff, and I think I wouldn't call people who don't do it cowards, but I think people have cowardly attitudes a lot of the time to this sort of thing. So thank you for being you and for doing this. I think it's really great.
I appreciate that. It's some nice words to get on a podcast and hear back to versus always trying to give to people to actually receive to is nice, and I do appreciate that a lot.
Of course,
so
man. Yes,
for
thank you.
you guys, if you guys like the podcast, please rate, review, subscribe, share with your friends, share with your family, share with your grandma. Check it out, thecarrollconnection.simplecast.com. Also available Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the major listening platforms. If you like to watch our podcast, go on YouTube, search The Carroll Connection, or at Jared Carroll, and it should pop up right for you. And if you want to be a guest or return as a guest, hit me up on Instagram at Jared Carroll or at The Carroll Connection, and we'll set that up. So, till next time, guys, peace.